So I apologize for not starting the recording earlier. We're doing a practice FRQ where we're analyzing the number of threatened and endangered plants and animals from 1998. We've already answered question A, where we found there were more vertebrates than invertebrates on the endangered list. And now we are on the second part of part B. We're calculating this percentage. We already got that the plants were 59% of the list, combining both endangered and threatened here. Now, how'd you do for invertebrates? I got a much smaller number. I took these 125 that we already found on part A. I added these to it, these threatened ones to the endangered, added those on there. And once I had done that, I divided by this same 1,143 total, right? And then that gave me basically 13% when I rounded off. Is that okay? Is that clear how I got that answer? You can see this is one of the math problems. Sometimes it's relatively straightforward percentages. Other times it could be more complicated. Okay, so we're skipping this, and instead we're doing this. What percent of U.S. species have recovery plans? So part of the Endangered Species Act is first you identify which creatures' populations are threatened, and then you follow up by designing a plan to bring them back to make sure they don't go extinct. So what percent of U.S. species, right, have recovery plans? We look up here. We're going to skip total listings again because that includes U.S. and non-U.S. So that means basically we can go back to this same 1,143 number for our total number of listed species, combined endangered and threatened. We're going to use that. What percent have recovery plans? Well, there you go. 780 have recovery plans. How do you find that percentage? 780 divided by 1,143, right? Now, just estimate off the top of your head. What kind of number should that be? Is it more than half? 780 more than half or less than half of 1,143? More than half. So your answer needs to be greater than 50%, huh? And just doing a quick estimate like that is, I think, really helpful to feel confident about your work. Or maybe not. Maybe you're like, wait a minute, I only got 3%. What's wrong here? And you know to double check it, huh? Did you already do it? Any answers out there for me? You got 68%? That sounds pretty reasonable. So 68% already have recovery plans. Part 2, discuss why there are not more recovery plans. Basically, that's 2/3 of them have recovery plans, huh? What about the other third? 1 in 3 species don't have recovery plans yet? What happened to them? Why have we left them out? Well, okay, it could be that we're not very interested in them, although the law says that we have to write a recovery plan. But do you think that recovery plan is like completed in a week, a year? It's going to take time for these recovery plans to be designed, especially to make them a practical plan that can actually be carried out. So there are quite a few, what do I want to say, stepping stones to cross to be able to complete a recovery plan. And then there's still no guarantee that it's going to work. It's still not certain that you'll be able to bring that species back or not. So you would write like a paragraph about those kinds of issues. And that takes care of part A, B, and C, huh? Part D, discuss two mammals, probably 2 points here, huh? Discuss two mammals that have been the target of eradication efforts because they were or are viewed as pests by some people, including your response and explanation of how and why these species have been viewed as pests. To mammals, they have to be mammals. Mammals that people have tried to get rid of. And not a mammal, but absolutely a pest that people have tried to get rid of, but it has to be in mammals. I talked about one of them that I think would be useful yesterday. There's a case study at the beginning of the PowerPoint.
Great wolves.
Yeah, I think the wolf would be one you could discuss. And although you'd end up probably repeating yourself, you could do coyote as well, or instead. Ideally, you would avoid repeating yourself and have two different kinds of stories. Ideally, but you're going to be under time pressure, so it's better to have two similar stories than only one. So you could do wolf and coyote being predators that we've gotten rid of because they prey on ranchers' cattle and other livestock. So another one that I can come up with off the top of my head, I mentioned a week ago, I think, was the prairie dog, where it's a small rodent. I remember we talked about cloning the ferret. The black-footed ferret of North America specializes in eating prairie dogs. And one reason their species has dropped, become endangered, so that we had to clone them, is that they specialize in prairie dogs, but many of the ranchers didn't like prairie dogs. They thought that they competed with cattle for food, and they also thought that the holes that they dug in the ground could end up breaking the legs of their livestock. And so there's been eradication efforts directed against the prairie dog. How and why they've been viewed as pests should be part of it, right? So how is it viewed as a pest? Why is it viewed as a pest? Include that in your response. So as you're writing, you want to go back and make sure you're checking off everything that's part of the question. Here's another one. I don't know. I know you've all heard of lemurs, right? Probably seen the ring-tailed lemur. First of all, lemurs are primitive primates. They're more primitive than a monkey, but they're relatively advanced mammals in terms of their brain power and so on, complex behavior. They only live on the island of Madagascar off the coast of Africa. We think that when primates were evolving, they evolved on Africa before Madagascar got broken off and carried away by plate tectonics. Once it broke off and got carried away, Madagascar was isolated from the rest of the African continent. And then after it was separated, monkeys evolved in Africa, but not in Madagascar because it had broken loose and was separated by an ocean. So the lemurs have survived in Madagascar, and there's, I don't know, 30 or 40 species. One of them, I don't know, maybe you've heard of it, it's called the aye-aye. And people there don't like this animal. They find it, I think they have some folk tales about it, that it's an evil animal. And you look at it and it looks pretty crazy. It's nocturnal, and it blends in with the dark really well. And it's got this one very strange adaptation. One of its fingers, I forget, maybe the middle finger, maybe the ring finger, but one of them is very long and narrow. So it's got this one weird long finger, and it uses that to tap on wood to try to find where there might be grubs living inside the wood. Kind of like a woodpecker would be looking for grubs in the trees. This guy is too, but it gives it this very strange appearance. And so people there have these superstitions about the aye-aye, and so they tend to kill them when they see them. superstitions that it's like an evil omen to that effect. It's called the Aye. It's spelled A-Y-E, twice. They kind of have a spooky look, I suppose. We could look it up here. I don't know if that counts as a pest, though. They did specifically ask for pests. So I don't know if they would count the Aye as a pest when I'm saying that it's got this bad reputation. I mean, some of these pictures look pretty cute, but then look at that one funky finger that it has, right? There's another one. So people have worked at eradicating this animal, maybe not because it's a pest, but maybe you could make the argument that from their spiritual point of view, it's a pest because it brings bad luck or something like that. So if you can make the argument and you can convince the reader and you're basing that on the facts, like the fact that this Aye exists and that it has been persecuted, then they might give you the point. I think they probably would. On the other hand, if you start talking about rhinos being eradicated, that's kind of different because they have this valuable aspect of their horn that the poachers are trying to get. So that to me doesn't quite seem like you could make the argument of them being a pest. So this is more like a social pest in a sense, as opposed to a physical pest or an economic pest. Okay, let's go back. That was part D, and that takes us to the last one. Describe 3 characteristics that make some species more susceptible to extinction than other species. What are some things that this is actually a good review for our test too, because you could well see something like this in the multiple choice part for maybe I list 5 possible characteristics, and which of these does not make it more susceptible to extinction. So when you're thinking about these, you want to think about what would cause a species to go extinct. First of all, it would have a low population, huh? So what would cause a species to have a low population? Think about the energy pyramid. Who's already susceptible to extinction just by the basic energy pyramid? The apex predator, up at the top of the pyramid, there's your number 1 characteristic, right? First characteristic, take care of that. Describe how being a top predator makes your population small, which means you need a lot of land, which means you're more likely to go extinct as people take over your land. Huh? So there's one. Then think again about how the population is what we're concerned about here. What other things would cause it to have a small population? What things would allow it to have a big population? These are characteristics they wouldn't have, right? Okay, could be about habitat destruction. Then, yeah, and the size of the habitat. I'm thinking more about their biology, though. And if you drop the vocabulary, that always impresses the reader. Use vocabulary. Yeah, and we talked about it last semester when we were studying populations. Right, the ones that reproduce quickly versus the ones that reproduce slowly. Now, if you were only to say animals that or organisms that reproduce slowly are more susceptible to extinction, I think you'd get your second point. If you can use the vocabulary, the nice thing about that, although it might not be required to give you the point, if they're kind of on the fence about whether to give you the point or not, and you use the vocabulary, that can push you over the edge and you'll get that point. So we're talking about R selected and K selected species. The K selected species tend to reproduce more slowly, and therefore they can be more susceptible to extinction. And then you can do some obvious things like species that have valuable body parts are susceptible to extinction, like rhino horn, elephant tusks, things like this. And again, if you can list specific examples, that will strengthen the case that you should get that point. So you can think of it like that. It's like you are writing for a judge who is trying to decide whether you should get a point here or not. So you want to try to make the case that you should get the point, right? Now, on the big exam, it says, describe 3 characteristics. In my class, when I give an exam, I might give you extra credit if you gave me a 4th. But they won't at the College Board. What they'll do is they will read the first 3 that you write down. You could write down 4 or 5. They won't look at the second 2. So you want to make sure your best ones are the first ones you write down. With me on that? So don't start by writing down a weak answer. Or if you do, go back and scratch it out so that your stronger answer is the first thing they read. Okay? So for instance, maybe you start writing, because there's not a lot of time, so you start writing and you kind of give a weak answer for number 1, and then you think of a good one for number 2, and you think of a good one for number 3, and then you remember another good one for number 4. You're not going to read number 4. But if it's better than number 1 was, I would scratch out number 1. So they look at your best answers. Okay, so some of this is about the information, and some of it is about the strategy that you want to take to score well on this test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay. Yeah.
Will the test be online or on paper?
I believe it will be on paper in the school building. And I think I just saw that it's going to be like May 27. Let me double check that. Yeah, it looks to me like it's going to be May 27th. I'm going to get more confirmation of that, but looks like May 27th is our date. Okay. So are we good with this FRQ and the approach that we took to try to earn as many points as possible? Keep in mind that the average FRQ score is like 5 out of 10. So if you don't get every single point, you can still do fine, right? So wilderness, new topic. There is a wilderness area to the southeast of Lake Tahoe. There's another one to the southwest and another one in the northeast, right near us. So I've been in all 3 of these wilderness areas. The one I keep going back to is the Desolation Wilderness. It's beautiful. And there's mountains and lakes there. There's dozens and dozens of lakes. You can see all these people have posted photos of backpacking in the Desolation Wilderness. Some people like to go in there and go fishing at the little lakes. Other people like to climb up on the mountaintops for the views. Watch out for the bears. Hang your food up in a tree. Although one reason it's called Desolation is because the trees are pretty few and far between. So this is a beautiful wilderness area. I believe it's actually one of the most used, one of the most visited in the U.S. Because people will drive up here from San Francisco, Sacramento to go hiking in Desolation. You can hike there, you can ride a horse in there, you can ski there, but you can't mountain bike there, and you can't take any motors in there because it's protected as a wilderness area. The one closest to us is Mount Rose, and I have not been able to find a decent map of that, but it basically goes, um, you know where the Mount Rose Highway crosses over the summit, it's basically there that you would park to enter the wilderness from this side. You can also enter it from the Reno side and work your way up. So we have this other wilderness area very close to us here. Same story, no motorized vehicles. So you have an assignment I told you about last class, where you're supposed to read the article about what is wilderness and answer the questions, and you have the rest of the period to work on that. All right, so if any of you have questions for me, I'm going to leave the meeting running. But you have the remainder of the period to work on your own, okay? And then I want you to move on and read chapter 11 before I see you again next week, huh? All right.